Ladies and gentlemen, we have logs, we have data. Blizzard said, please give us as much feedback about corruption as you possibly can. Well, okay then. What you're looking at here is me doing the second most recorded damage ever done to High Warlords and Esh. Not just in Druids, but literally ever recorded. Although I think it's in third place now. But this is exactly what corruption is. It is the circus, it is the casino, it is the fitting end to Battle for Azeroth as we know it. And I've got to say this, I'm not entirely angry about it, but I should be. I should be screaming from the rooftops about this. Why? I mean, we can look historically. In Warlords of Draenor, I stopped playing DPS because I was no longer in control of what my character produced. That I was doing the exact same thing over and over and over and over and over again, and the results were always different. I'm sure of the amount of pulls, the average DPS I pulled was probably about the same, but that doesn't appeal to me in the least. It really doesn't. When I need to do on demand, I want to be able to push my character to its maximum wherever possible, and I could not do that. At a certain level, it had just become down to the game, and that was when the RNG of DPS was actually not super big, about a 10% variation, which I consider huge. There's a 10% variation in what my character produces that's completely out of my control. It doesn't come down to how skilled I am, it doesn't come down to how well I played, how well I positioned. There's just a chance I'll do 10% more damage purely by whatever numbers the computer happens to throw out. And I lost complete faith in Blizzard at that point regarding DPS classes. The competitive side was gone. The interesting side was gone. It was down to something else that was nothing I could influence in any way, shape, or form. Therefore, when it came to farming rates, progressions done, and looking to push yourself to see what your character could produce with all this awesome gear that was available, it was all just down to RNG. Who's the best player? No idea. Don't know. So I stopped. I moved over to playing a tank. And I had a better time with it. Now, the RNG is so absurd that it's hard to really grasp why. What is this belief that Blizzard has? Before we get into the details of this, what is this entrenched, and I mean entrenched because it's been going on for years now, that they have a problem. The loot in World of Warcraft just isn't very interesting. We know that. They've done talks on it at seminars as they struggle to maintain balance and order while creating interesting items. Yet the solution they've come up with is something that the community at large has been vehemently against. Like, they're not into it. Which is the extraordinarily powerful items that can now at this point carry 40 to 50% of your damage is purely down to chance. Think about that for a moment. Purely down to chance. Why would that be fun? And it seems to come from this mentality that the thing that makes loot interesting is that every time you loot something, it has this possibility of destroying every other item imaginable in the game. Doesn't really matter where it comes from. Now we've had item levels stabilize across the board. It hasn't fixed it because while they removed Warforging and Titan Forging, they then just dumped on top another system. Now, before we get into why I'm not particularly angry about the system, let's talk about the pros. There are good things to corruption, something I've missed for a long time in World of Warcraft. Firstly, I'm building a character again. That's really fun. I'm looking at corruption resistances. I'm looking at when my cape will get more. Then I can squeeze more corruption items in. I'm thinking about the fights I'm doing. Are these single target focused? Are they AoE focused? What corruptions would be best for those? I'm also deciding how much corruption I can have. Risk versus reward. What does the encounter present towards me? If I'm in PvP, do I want to risk having a thing from beyond and a very powerful eye attacking me or a slow effect? Or do I want to turn that down depending on which encounter I'm about to face? All these things are interesting and cool. They were all part of World of Warcraft for a really long time. Previously, it would have been hit and expertise, dodge, parry, haste values, crit values, things like that. If I was a tank like I was in most of the game, then I would be looking at the encounter. Is this like a DPS Zerg like Terran Gorefiend? In which case I'm going to modify and rebuild my gear. I'm going to go heavier into being able to attack the boss and how hard I hit the boss, while sacrificing how much damage I will take. People will have to heal me more. Vice versa. Is this a DPS check? No, not really. Okay, then I could turn down my threat amplifying abilities and gear, and then focus more on avoidance. I take less damage, allowing the healers to focus on the rest of the raid. These were all interesting RPG elements that have since been stripped down in the sake of simplicity. Hit isn't interesting. Expertise on its own isn't interesting. Versatility is still in the game, but you get the idea is that we were building our character around what that character was going to focus on. We're doing that again. I also like, and I think as a pro, is that while we will be discussing the heavy RNG associated with some of these corrupted items, you don't actually have to go that way. That's entirely up to you. There are also things that are just consistent items. Percentage haste increase, percentage crit chance, all these things are very regulated and standard. If we look at one of the biggest outliers like Infinite Stars, let's look at a demonstration here. Infinite Stars has the potential, it has the capacity to give you extraordinarily high DPS, way above and beyond what should be possible for your character. It will go completely batshit insane, yet it's not down to you, it's down to the game. However, you're also taking the risk of it not doing that and dropping you way below the potential of your character as well. It has such a broad spectrum of results, you're rolling the dice every time you deal with it. If you go with something more consistent, like these percentage values, then your likelihood is you'll have much more consistent DPS. It will still be affected by all the other RNG elements which exist in the game, down to essences, down to Azerite armor, all those things, but it will be much more consistent. However, the sacrifice is it will never reach the levels of absurdity that the other ones can. The other characters might simply just destroy you based on the fact that they had a good pull. It's as simple as that, and skill becomes very much irrelevant. On the back of that, we could also say that a lot of players, certainly when they're farming or repeating content, they know they're going to win, so why not risk going for the ridiculous win? The ridiculous high, the craziness, a lot of temptation. As I said recently at my stream, and is a very common element amongst most people, nobody really cares if you consistently catch that £20 fish. It's decent, it's large, and if you catch it every time, good on you. But then you're going to be dwarfed by that guy who managed to catch the £40 one and stick it on his wall and celebrate it. There'll be photographs and people will tell stories like, did you see that guy catch the £40 one? While you're sat there with your consistent, yet kind of boring in comparison, £20. It's just the nature of the beast. People like the big reward, so they'll take that risk more often than not. The RNG elements are very tempting. Very, very tempting. And of course, one of the biggest problems we have, and we've discussed those two pros, is that they are just simply way, 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 way too powerful. As I said at the beginning, the basis of the corruption system in terms of managing this kiss-curse effect is relatively interesting. It's something I've missed for a while. Yet, what is Blizzard's obsession with these extraordinarily powerful items? It's not satisfying. I have this ridiculous log. I've also had other pulls like this one where I did the God pull. Yeah, it's not because of me. It's nothing to do with me. At some point, I could have played much worse there, but as long as I was firing spells, the same effect would have occurred. Therefore, how can I be satisfied with it? How can I be happy with it? I can't be. It's not because of me. And that brings up the hollowness of this system. It's incredibly hollow. It's incredibly shallow. And again, I should be more angry about it than I actually am. Another problem systems like this cause is the corruption, pardon the pun, that it causes to the rest of the game. I've already spoken to people who are MDI world champions, and they're like, at the moment in the MDI, one of the biggest conversations they have is how many 5 rolls the Outlaw Rogues got, which give them extraordinarily DPS, but it's purely RNG whether you get it. And in Guns runs, where they both play at an equal, or if not better skill level, those teams can still lose because the other team just happened to get more 5 rolls. Their rogues just did tremendously more damage than anyone else. Now we're going to have that problem exacerbated even further. If in the next MDI they allow corruption items or any competitive scene, is it going to be down to Twilight Devastations that happen to just proc endlessly and the tanks were doing more damage than the DPS? This is something we're already seeing, as I demonstrated on stream recently. We brought our tank along, he wore several Twilight Destruction items, and lo and behold, out DPS nearly everybody in the dungeon. That makes a massive effect. Now, I know some of you are going to say, the game shouldn't be balanced around those guys. I find it fun. True, but it can't be ignored that this is disrupting the entire game for a lot of people. And it shouldn't be strange that some people want to see what their character can produce because of them. In a world that's filled with competitive sports and esports that are all based on skill for the most part, it should not be strange or a weird idea that there are people playing World of Warcraft who enjoy being competitive and want a level playing field and want an even playing field. That shouldn't be weird, although I do read regularly people saying, who cares? A lot of people. And it's very normal to want to do that. It was one of the biggest things I enjoyed about the game was, certainly during Kata and early Warlords, was being able to compete with the best across the world and see who played it better. How did they do it better? I can show you 2 logs right now of 2 rogues doing Mythic Shadar, which is straight up the DPS boss. Their kill times were exactly the same, perfectly identical. Their gear setup is pretty much the same, within 1 item level of each other. Yet there's an 8k discrepancy. Looking at the spells they cast, they did them evenly. They both got fixated 1 time each. What's the difference between these players? No idea. What do logs even stand for now? Because most people like to check their logs and see what result they got. How high was my damage? Does it matter anymore? No. But then again, it hasn't really mattered for a long time. It's one of the reasons that a lot of people private log now, because they know it doesn't really matter, and anybody who still kind of holds on to the idea of it mattering might do something silly in raids. So let's keep it private. There's no reason for people to have that temptation. The corruption system corrupts all in every aspect of the game. Now, you might say, yeah, but skill matters. Let's talk about the pay-to-win element. BOEs can't be ignored. BOEs are very similar to the legendary system, yet in a more evil way. The BOE system is possibly the most disgusting element of the corruption system. Right now, in many slots of your character, you can simply go to the auction house and purchase the best possible items in the game from now until Shadowlands for gold. That should never, ever, ever be the case. In my personal opinion, that is disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful. BOEs have a place. They've always had a place in the game. What they should do, though, is prop you up. You gain some edge as you're beginning to move into PvP, PvE, whatever your chosen content is. Or if you're doing transmog and stuff, you get a very powerful item, but there should always be a better reward waiting for you for overcoming some very difficult challenge. That should always exist. Being able to purchase not one, but multiple slots of your best quality item is dissatisfying, it's hollow, it's shallow, and it's bad for everybody. And I wonder, having witnessed so many people buying WoW tokens to transfer them into gold so they can buy things off the auction house, I have a huge fear that Blizzard will look at that and see their coffers, their bank account rolling up because people are literally churning extra funds into the game in order to buy items just so they can have this most powerful item and say, this is actually a good idea. We're as close to full pay to win as we've ever been. I know some of you are going to go, well, the character still matters. You're absolutely correct. We tested it, in fact. What if I gave my character capable of these things to somebody who has never played a druid before, has never seen Ny'alotha, has never really played World of Warcraft beyond turbo casual level and has still no idea what's going on? What if they played my character? So, enter my wife. We gave my wife my character. It's not against the TOS. We're married. She played my druid inside Ny'alotha LFR just to see what would happen. I gave her a brief rundown before she went in, including descriptions such as keep the orange one on, keep the purple one on, and press the pink one when the bar fills up. That was about it. Gave her a quick 2-minute overview and then left her to it. Didn't help her at all or guide her during the encounters. What did we find? She achieved around 30,000 DPS. Now, that is less than half of what I can achieve on that character during that same encounter. But one thing that upset several people, and did upset them, is that people in the stream were also joining in, and people watching at home, she out-DPS'd their characters who they try very hard on. Characters they've spent a lot of time building, putting together, and because of the nature of her gear, she simply out-DPS'd them. I will let you draw your own conclusions from that, but one thing I take away from it is the player still obviously matters. But once it reaches a certain level, it's the gear that takes over. So you have these two elements working against each other, particularly at the top end, and it's not something I want to see. There is absolutely no justification in my mind that a pair of braces or a pair of boots or a ring should be responsible for such a high high amount of your final results. It should all be everything working together, but ultimately always the player should be the one bringing that control. The player should be able to reproduce the same results with that same character repeatedly. On that stem, we performed another experiment. We sent out to our community, why don't you do a test dummy run, 6 runs, 3 minutes, and see what happens. Make sure it's the same every single time. Make sure the dummy heals up. And so many of you did this. Now, I know some of you are going to go, but that's not enough data. Even with all your community, it's not enough data. It's not long enough, etc., etc. In fact, if you look at logs, 3 minutes is pretty close to how many boss kills go. As the difficulty rises up, you might get to 6 minutes, but there's not much after that either. Even Raden is only a 5 to 6 minute fight on Mythic mode. There are lots of fights that are about that time, and as it gets easier, more and more 3 minutes. What did they find? Well, in fact, some people got very upset as it became very apparent to them that there's now a 30 to 40% deviation on their DPS over the course of that time. That's an enormous swing that is completely out of your hands. If you're using something like Mind Flays or Twilight Devastation or Infinite Stars, has struggles with dummies in certain areas, but you can see the point is that I'm playing the exact same way, I'm the exact same player with the exact same buffs, using the exact same character, yet the results I'm getting are 30% different on a pull-to-pull basis. Now, some people, especially those who didn't have much corruption, they had a bit more consistency, but of course then it fell down to the Azerite armor, and the Essence system, and all the buffs and procs that come alongside with that. Vision of Perfection being a notorious candidate in that situation. This brings me to why I'm not too angry with corruption right now. I'm exhausted with it. I'll be honest, I'm exhausted and I'm apathetic with having to kind of repeat this process every single time a brand new system comes into World of Warcraft, particularly in Battle for Azeroth. The determination of Blizzard to tie RNG down to a character's performance baffles me and makes no sense. It's so weird. And I've been tired of it since basically the start of BFA. Getting the right Azerite armor, then Azerite buffed and nerfed. We're going to come back to that in a second. Then the introduction of the Essence systems, buffed and nerfed. And now we have the corruption system on top. We will note that we have had 0 class balancing at all since 8.3 came out, which is unheard of. It is unheard of to be in a situation where we do not have class balancing after Heroic Week. Heroic Week is when Blizzard gets so much data on what players are doing that they're able to draw conclusions on which classes are weaker and which classes are too strong. Yet we've seen nothing. And the likelihood is, because there's so many variables right now, especially with the vast amount of corruption items in the game, who's acquiring what, who has too many, how much corruption did they play with, how much did he play with little, that the data is just everywhere. It's absolutely skewed all over the place. And therefore, drawing a good conclusion about balancing must be impossible at this point, which is why we haven't really seen anything. And I would be surprised if we do see anything for the remainder of BFA. If they do something, awesome. Congratulations. Thank you. Some players are languishing and waiting. But still, having it not happen now, weeks after this has come out, is very, very weird. While we have seen corruption items be nerfed and buffed accordingly, similar to Azerite and Essences. Now, this is about going into Shadowlands. That's the whole point of this video. The corruption system is an utter clown show, but considering how BFA is, I'm kind of having fun with it. I can't deny that. It's so silly, it's so stupid that I'm kind of having fun with it, and it doesn't change much from what we've had throughout all of BFA. It's been a clown fiesta since the start, and every time we seem to get close somewhere, a new system comes in that bugs it all up again, and now we've got it even worse. But it is the nature of BFA, therefore I have some apathy and exhaustion to having to deal with this. It's another system on top of another system that's on top of another system that's on top of another system that is all adding up to this mountain that's led to this colossal clown show. So I'm enjoying it. I'm having fun with it. That's my decision. I'm not going to shout and rave from the rooftops. We've provided all this information. It's just too much. I know many players like myself want consistency with their characters, and while I can choose some consistency with my corruption, the other systems of BFA interrupt that themselves. So I want to be able to go back to a time where I can pretty much tell you what my damage will be after the fight, and then being able to sit down, look at the fight, look at my character, and figure out how I can improve on that. That I can check logs and figure out, hey, how did this guy do so much more damage because we're all on an even keel? We all have access to the same items. How is he doing so much more damage than me? And then I can challenge myself and improve as a player. I cannot do that anymore in World of Warcraft. And maybe that's Blizzard's goal, is to obfuscate what's happening at the top end to achieve what? I don't really know. To try and reduce competitiveness, to try and reduce competitiveness, or to maybe make it so, hey, we're all friends and it's all the same thing. But that doesn't really happen at the top end, which is where people really check things out. So what's the idea behind it? I don't know. I really don't know. Personally, I prefer really strong items that are set in stone. Ash Candy, Shadow Flame Staff, all these items that we know of historically, they have memory, Gurthalak, all these items that people chase and say, I have mine, so now I'm on par with that guy. If there's a Biss trinket, I have that trinket, but so do the other guys, and now we can see where we're going with it. Now we can see who's doing what with it. How does he do 3% more damage than me? And we can all play against each other, while the guys lower down, which I'm sure get a lot of... I feel like there's something to fight and defend here, are probably suffering more than anybody. These items, for them, are so out of reach gold-wise. I've realized this from talking to my streamers. So many people have so few amounts of gold compared to a lot of other people. And therefore, these items are massively out of reach, and they're kind of chasing this never-ending treadmill of hoping something drops from a Warfront or from a Mythic Plus cache, and they're getting so much fewer items. I was lucky enough to sit down with Nex from Aversion, World 4th, and of course speak to Turkey from Midwinter while they were in their World 7 position, who were just like, we're having 1% and 2% wipes on bosses. We might be playing better than those guys who are ahead of us in the world first race. But the fact is, they have more gold, more resources. They're able to buy more stuff for their characters. And the casual player base isn't getting a look in on these items because these top guys are just sucking them all out of the player base, even for their alts. And it's the way it goes. Corruption is also a system that is super important for a very short period of time, but over weeks and weeks as supply increases, that's going to diminish. And we have a Legion Legendary system, which is, at the start, chasing these extraordinarily powerful items because they are far too powerful. And then, later down the line, it doesn't really matter. There's so many of them, it's not a big deal. So it has only a very small period of time where the system is interesting and relevant before it becomes non-existent and just par for the course. That's not a good system. It has no legs to stand on. It's not got good longevity. But BFA is drawing to a close. The sun is setting on this expansion, and therefore I can let it slide for now because it's no worse really than what we've had since the start of BFA. And I think that's where a lot of my apathy comes from, is it's not really any different than what we've had from the start. But as I said, we're looking towards Shadowlands. So, for my opinion, going to Shadowlands, having something we can focus on. Doesn't need to be corruption, but something that we can build our character around is fun, it's interesting, and it's engaging. Big shout outs to that. It absolutely does not need to be anywhere near as strong as this is. It's absurd. We've seen such power spikes from this expansion, certainly in this patch 8.3, that it just makes no sense. It's illogical, it's crazy, it's a clown show, whatever. My big worry is the Covenant system. As we know, Shadowlands is bringing in the Covenant system. If you're not sure what it is, a brief overview is that you will have to pick a faction and you will lock your character into being with that faction. So far we know of 4 with possibly a 5th. That means that your character is essentially locked. You can change it, but it's going to be difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. So once you lock in, you kind of want to stay with that faction. A big issue of this is that you are... You are going to be basing that decision on a number of factors. Ideally, Blizzard would like you to choose it based on cosmetics. Great. All for that. Superb. More of that. However, they're also introducing all the new spells and powers that you're going to get in Shadowlands via the Covenant system. When you choose a Covenant, your class will gain spells and abilities that are unique to that Covenant. You can already see where the problem lies. So far, and especially through BFA, Blizzard has been unable, and I wish this wasn't the case, to prove that they can balance new power gains into the game. But they have 100% failure rate on doing this. The Azerite powers that came into the game in the beginning over weeks and months were nerfed and changed and altered. Let's never forget all those thunderous blast memes of the early days. They couldn't do it with artifact weapons despite promising that artifact weapons will not be nerfed. We saw that the rogues got specifically affected by this after piling all their artifact power into a certain set. I believe it was Outlaw, and then suddenly Outlaw got nerfed and now Sub was the best one. We saw it with the essences, buffed and nerfed when they came out. They changed way from testing all the way through live after weeks and stuff. We saw them getting changed and altered. And now, of course, if you guys are probably well aware, especially if you spent millions of gold on Echoing Void gear, is it got a 50% nerf weeks after it had come out. And then even more nerfs after that. Lots and lots of changes because Blizzard is unable to balance this stuff for the release into the live game. Especially when more and more data comes out and more clever players start messing around with the possibilities. So what does that mean for Shadowlands? If Blizzard keeps this system of us gaining power gains, which are vastly different, is people who are caring about the output of their character, the performance of their character, which is a very normal thing for an RPG, they will be picking the one that gives them the best power. So suddenly you have all these players drifting over to one side, but not all players are going to be educated on that. Some of them are going to pick the different ones and then suddenly realize, why does my mage do 30% less damage than that mage despite the fact that we're equally geared? What the hell is going on? Oh, it's the Covenant ability. And then maybe 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks after Shadowlands comes out, we start seeing the nerfs rolling in. The ability of this one has been nerfed. The other one has been buffed. All these kind of things, exactly as we have seen with every single system that has come in BFA. And now you can't swap. Now you can't swap without having to jump through a lot of hoops and basically start over again with your Covenant system. And then it gets changed again. We're looking at a disastrous road ahead. In terms of gearing, I like the base of the corruption system, but let's keep it simple. Let's make it effective. Come up with a few items, not 60 variations of corruption. There doesn't need to be that many. A good solid item that people can work towards, that they can enjoy, and when they get it, they're happy because they know that's the best one. And make them earn it. We don't need to buy it from the auction house. At the same time, don't tie player power to the Covenant system. Find a different way. Create something separate. Similar to an artifact weapon if it has to be. Something different. But don't lock us in to these Covenant systems going forward, because it's just as important as gearing. It's just as important. And it's been proven time and time again. You guys just cannot get this right. So don't risk it. It's not worth it. Players will be unhappy. You'll be frustrated. Please don't do this. Thank you very much for listening, guys. Enjoy your corruption for the rest of BFA. It's the best advice I can give you because that's what I'm doing. It's already a clown circus. It's already going on. Just enjoy it. BFA is the sun is setting. That's what I'm trying to say. The sun is setting. Just enjoy it for the remainder of the time we've got. And hopefully we'll have Shadowlands Alpha coming very soon. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye. Considerably less, was that their DPS had sways of about 30%.
You might have to stop working.
Come here.
You might have to stop working.
Tell the people why I have to do an edit here.
Because Daddy needs to go. Mummy said Daddy needs to help the washing in my room, so Mummy can do the washing later.
I'll be right back. Clap. Do a clap. Good boy.